Level 1. The Innocent Prince of Jerusalem. My life began in the sun-drenched halls of the royal palace in Jerusalem in 1161, a time when the Crusader states were at the zenith of their fragile power. I was the son of King Amalric IV and Agnes of Courtenay, born into a world of shifting sands, clashing steel, and the heavy weight of divine expectation. As a young boy, I was bright, spirited, and physically gifted. I spent my days learning the arts of war and the intricacies of diplomacy under the watchful eye of my tutor, the great historian William of Tyre. It was William who first noticed the shadow that would define my existence. One afternoon, while playing with other noble children, he observed that I did not cry out when my playmates pinched my arms. While the other boys shrieked in pain, I remained stoic, not out of bravery, but out of a terrifying lack of sensation. My right arm was numbing. William, with a heavy heart, began to suspect the truth that would soon be confirmed by the royal physicians. I had contracted leprosy. In the 12th century, this was not merely a disease. It was a living death sentence, a mark of divine displeasure in the eyes of the superstitious, and a slow, agonizing erosion of the flesh. Yet, despite this creeping darkness, I was the heir to the throne of the Holy City. Level 2. The Boy King and the Burden of the Crown. The death of my father, Amalric, in 1174 thrust the crown upon my brow when I was only 13 years old. I was Baldwin IV, King of Jerusalem, a leper king tasked with holding together a fractured kingdom surrounded by the rising tide of Islamic unification. My coronation was a somber affair. While the bells of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre rang out, they felt to me like a funeral knell for my youth. I was too young to rule in my own right, leading to a period of regency dominated by ambitious men like Miles of Plancy and later my cousin, Count Raymond III of Tripoli. Navigating the court was as treacherous as any battlefield. The court party, led by my mother Agnes and the Lusignan brothers, constantly clashed with the frontier barons like Raymond. I was the pivot point upon which the stability of the realm balanced. I had to learn quickly how to assert my will, despite my deteriorating physical state. My skin began to thicken and ulcerate, and the sensation in my extremities continued to fade, but my mind remained sharp. I understood that Jerusalem's survival depended on a delicate balance of internal unity and external deterrence. I was a king who could not produce an heir, a king whose very touch was feared. Yet I was the only thing standing between my people and the ambitions of the great Sultan Saladin. Level 3. The Shadow of Saladin. Across the borders, a titan was rising. Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to us as Saladin, had succeeded in doing what no Muslim leader had done for decades, uniting Egypt and Syria. His vision was clear: the reclamation of Jerusalem for Islam. Saladin was a man of immense talent, chivalry, and strategic brilliance. He was not merely a raider, he was a statesman who played the long game, waiting for the Crusader states to crumble from within. Our relationship was one of mutual respect and lethal competition. He saw me as a shoal, a term for someone afflicted, yet he never underestimated me. He watched as my body failed, expecting the kingdom of Jerusalem to fall like overripe fruit. I, in turn, watched his every move from the ramparts of my citadels. I knew that we could not win a war of attrition against the combined might of his empire. Every diplomatic maneuver, every skirmish, and every fortified castle was a desperate attempt to buy time. I was a dying king defending a dying kingdom against a man destined for greatness. The tension between us was the pulse of the Levant. Level 4. The Miracle at Montgisard. The defining moment of my military career came in 1177. Saladin invaded from Egypt with a massive force of nearly 30,000 men, confident that the leper boy could not mount a defense. I was 16, and the disease had already begun to claim my hands and feet. I could no longer mount a horse without assistance. Yet, when the news reached Jerusalem, I summoned what remained of the Knight Templars and the local levies. We were barely 500 knights and a few thousand infantry. We intercepted Saladin's army near Ramla at a place called Montgisard. They were spread out, looting the countryside, caught off guard by our sudden appearance. I ordered the true cross to be raised. I dismounted, falling to my knees before the relic, and prayed for victory with tears streaming down my scarred face. When I rose, a fervor took hold of the men. We charged. The sheer desperation and religious ecstasy of our small force shattered Saladin's elite guard. It was a rout. Saladin himself barely escaped on a racing camel. For a brief moment, the shadow of the crescent retreated. I returned to Jerusalem in triumph, hailed as a second David, though the victory cost me dearly in physical exertion. The Leper King had humbled the great Sultan. Level 5. The decay of the flesh and the state. As the years progressed, the leprosy accelerated its cruel work. By my early 20s, I was blind in one eye, and my hands were curled into useless claws. I had to be carried in a litter to the battlefield, a sight that moved my soldiers to both pity and fierce loyalty. The physical pain was constant, a searing phantom heat that radiated from nerves that should have been dead. But the political pain was worse. Because I could not father children, the question of my succession became a poison in the veins of the kingdom. My sister, Sibylla, was the key. Her marriage to William of Montferrat ended in his death, leaving her with a young son, Baldwin IV. Her subsequent marriage to Guy of Lusignan was a disaster. Guy was a man of vanity and poor judgment, a new man from the West who did not understand the fragile ecosystem of the East. I watched with growing horror as the factions at court tore at each other, fueled by Guy's incompetence and the arrogance of men like Renaud of Châtillon, who constantly broke our truces with Saladin by attacking Muslim caravans. I was a king who could see the coming storm, but lacked the hands to steer the ship. Level 6. The Siege of Kerak and the Final Stand. One of the most dramatic displays of my resolve occurred in 1183 during the Siege of Kerak. Renaud of Châtillon was celebrating the wedding of his stepson, Humphrey of Touraine, to my sister Isabella inside the fortress. Saladin, incensed by Renaud's provocations, laid siege to the castle with massive siege engines. Despite being near death and unable to walk, I summoned the army of Jerusalem once more. I was carried on a pallet between two horses, leaden with fever and pain. When Saladin heard that the Leper King was approaching with the host of Jerusalem, he chose to withdraw rather than risk another Montchisard. It was a testament to the psychological power I still wielded. I entered Kerak not as a conqueror, but as a ghost. I was 22 years old, yet I looked like an ancient man. I had spent my entire reign fighting two wars, one against the enemies of my faith and one against my own body. I knew then that my time was measured in months, not years. I appointed my nephew, the young Baldwin V, as co-king to ensure a transition, but I knew the kingdom was standing on a precipice. Level 7. The Final Breath and the Holy City. I died on March 16th, 1185, at the age of 24. My final days were spent in a darkened room in Jerusalem, the air thick with the smell of incense and medicinal herbs. I had outlived the expectations of every physician and outfought the greatest general of the age. As I lay dying, I looked out toward the dome of the rock and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the icons of the city I had sacrificed everything to protect. I left behind a kingdom that was internally fractured and externally besieged. Without my presence to act as a buffer, the rivalries between the barons and the hot-headedness of Guy of Lusignan would soon lead to the catastrophic defeat at the Horns of Hattin just 2 years later. People often ask if I felt cursed. Perhaps. But I also felt a strange sense of purpose. My leprosy stripped away the vanities of kingship, leaving only the raw duty of the office. I was a king of bone and spirit, a monarch who ruled not through physical might, but through an iron will that refused to yield to the inevitable. My tomb was placed in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, near the site where Christ was said to have been crucified, a fitting resting place for a king who wore a crown of thorns every day of his life. Level 8. The Legacy of the Leper King. History has been both kind and unkind to me. For centuries, I was a footnote, a curiosity of the Crusades. But in recent times, my story has been rediscovered as a symbol of resilience and the triumph of the human spirit over insurmountable odds. I am remembered as the Leper King, but I hope I am also remembered as the king who kept the peace. I held together a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society during one of the most volatile periods in human history. My life was a tragedy of the flesh, but a triumph of the soul. I proved that a leader is not defined by their physical perfection, but by their commitment to their people and their ability to command respect through integrity and courage. Saladin himself mourned my passing, recognizing that a worthy adversary had left the stage. The kingdom of Jerusalem eventually fell, as all earthly kingdoms do. But the memory of the blind, scarred king who rode to battle to save his city remains etched in the stones of Jerusalem. I was Baldwin IV, the king who refused to die until his duty was done. My life was short, my suffering was great, but my crown remained untarnished by cowardice. In the end, that is all a king can ask of history. Philosophical reflection on the reign of Baldwin IV. To understand my life is to understand the concept of agony as governance. Most monarchs rule through the projection of strength, the glistening armor, the firm hand, the commanding voice. I had none of these. My armor hid bandages. My hand could not hold a quill. My voice was often a raspy whisper. Yet, my authority was perhaps more absolute than my father's because it was born of a perceived martyrdom. The knights followed me not because they feared my wrath, but because they were ashamed to show weakness in the presence of a man who suffered so much yet asked for so little. The leprosy was my monastery. It cloistered me from the temptations of the flesh and the distractions of a long life. I knew I had no future, which allowed me to focus entirely on the present survival of the realm. There is a strange freedom in knowing you are doomed. It removes the paralyzing fear of failure. If I failed, I was merely a leper who succumbed to his fate. If I succeeded, I was a miracle. This paradox allowed me to take risks at Montgisard and Carac that a more secure king might have avoided. My reign also highlights the inherent weakness of hereditary monarchy. My inability to produce an heir was the greatest sin of my reign in the eyes of the law. Yet it was the very thing that forced the kingdom to look toward a collective future, a future they ultimately squandered. When I look back from the silence of history, I do not regret the disease. It was the chisel that shaped me. Without it, I might have been just another Baldwin, another name in a long list of Frankish lords. With it, I became a symbol of Jerusalem itself, scarred, suffering, but unyielding. The strategic landscape of the 12th century Levant. The geopolitical reality I faced was a shifting mosaic. To the north, the county of Edessa had already fallen. To the west, the Byzantine Empire was a fading power, capable of offering only intermittent and conditional support. To the south and east, the Ayyubid tide was rising. My strategy was one of active defense. We could not afford to lose a single major battle, for our manpower was finite. Every night lost was a gap that could not be filled. This is why the presence of the military orders, the Templars, and the Hospitallers was so vital. They were the professional core of my army, men bound by vows that mirrored my own isolation. They understood the necessity of sacrifice. However, their independence was also a thorn in my side. They often pursued their own agendas, dragging the kingdom into conflicts we weren't prepared for. Managing these states within a state required a diplomatic finesse that my physical condition often made difficult. I had to be a judge, a general, and a mediator, all while my nervous system was failing me.